is a real pleasure to have Rich Karlgaard today. Rich is the former publisher of Forbes. He is now editor-at-large, and of course, he continues to be a futurist. So today, I want to have him talk about policy matters. He's incisive, obviously, about innovation and futures, but he's also pretty damn good about public policy. So I'm going to have him talk about acrobatics in government. We're also going to talk about a new book called Late Bloomers and see how that, if his views have changed in the pandemic. Rich, welcome aboard. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for doing this, Vinnie. We've been correspondents for these many years and have watched amazing changes in technology, and especially the enterprise technology space that we both love and cover.
Well, Rich, hope you're doing okay. Mark Benioff, talking about enterprise software, Mark Benioff, CEO of Salesforce, said a few weeks ago, he said, is this a pandemic or an epidemic? It started off as a health issue, then became a financial issue, then we had the crisis with diversity, and now you guys are having your fires. So hope you're doing okay through all these bang, bang, bang crises.
Well, yesterday, the air quality where I live, and I live about 5 miles south of Stanford University, so in the heart of Silicon Valley. If you had a triangle and the points of the triangle were Stanford, Apple's headquarters, and Google's headquarters, I would live within that triangle. And it's a beautiful part of the world, an expensive place to live part of the world. Lucky we bought our house when we did. But yesterday, I would have described the air as Beijing bad.
Oh my
and in
God.
fact, that's borne out. I think there have been some recent studies that the San Francisco Bay Area has some of the worst air in the world. And it's making people grumpy. I mean, it's one of those things on top of, all the COVID slowdown, the uncertainties around that. It's been a rough slog. Certainly 2020 is an annus horribilis, at least compared to the good fortune that those of us who live in the United States have, compared to recent years.
But let's talk a little bit about policy, then we'll come back to enterprise software and some other themes. But you commented a few weeks ago that we're seeing the revival of federalism. You said we're seeing 50 states experiment on how to treat COVID and how to recover. So talk a little bit about that, and talk about governors or local government executives who have impressed you.
Yes, we have, either by planning or by default, and you probably make an argument it's more by default, that we're tackling the COVID challenge one state at a time, multiplied by 50 states. Now, President Trump takes a lot of criticism for not being more aggressive from the get-go, and we'll be litigating that argument, as they say, for years and decades to come. But what we do have is states deciding for themselves, and some have done some more impressive work than others. And Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York, is liked by a lot of people. He made some terrible mistakes. He sent more than 6,000 people into nursing homes, and really that was a super spreader event in the state of New York. But he was, I'll forgive him in a sense, because he and everybody else was operating with almost no data in March. I will say it kind of bothers me when certain governors say they follow the science, where a real scientist would say they follow the data. And, the good thing is that there's so much more data around the virus and what to do, as we were talking before you hit the record button, how you treat people in emergency rooms, and so forth. And so I think some governors have done a better job than others, clearly. If you're more on the lockdown side, I think you would hold Jay Inslee of Washington as a pretty good model for that approach. If you're more on the free things up side, the governor of Georgia took a lot of criticism, even from President Trump, when he was the first to say that he was going to open up his economy in late April, and they've had pretty good results. The really good governors, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, are the ones that are not following the science. I'm being skeptical when you hear that. It's just a cliche at this point. They're collecting and analyzing data. They're following the data. It's data trends that will lead us toward better science. So I'm a big fan of and a personal friend of Doug Burgum, the governor of North Dakota, not least because he's the most accomplished technology person at any high level in the federal or state government level. He was the founder of Great Plains Software back in the early 80s. He took it public in 1997, sold it to Microsoft, then worked at Microsoft for a few years. Satya Nadella briefly reported to Doug while Doug was at Microsoft. And Doug is also a tremendously effective venture capitalist operating out of Fargo, North Dakota, of all places. He was one of the first outside investors in Success Factors, which had a successful exit to SAP a few years ago. And he was the first outside investor and for a while chairman of Atlassian, which has just had a tremendous run. And so Doug is a Republican, but Doug follows the data. And Doug went against sort of the conventional fellow Republicans when he came out for contact tracing. I think the libertarian instinct of a lot of Republicans is contact tracing is the camel's nose in the tent. You know, it's going to hurt privacy. Doug showed why it wouldn't, at least the way they did it. Anonymity was guaranteed. And North Dakota's, you know, done fairly well. I asked Doug, who on the other side of the political fence do you like? And he likes the woman who's the governor of Rhode Island, whose name escapes me right now, has done a really good job without calling a lot of attention to herself. But again, somebody who took early notice of what was going on in the Northeast, where there was a lot of bad news squeezed between Massachusetts and New York, and really got into contact tracing and those kinds of things, which have been very effective.
Rich, you know, you write a regular column for Forbes Asia, so you obviously keep up with that part of the world. Any international global leaders who have impressed you more than others?
Well, I've said this for a long time. The global leader that I think is hugely effective is Lee Hsien Loong, who's the head of state of Singapore and is the son of the inventor of modern Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew. Now, he's Harvard educated. He straddles a fine line between being a supporter of the West but not antagonizing China. Singapore, with a population of 6 million people, can't afford to antagonize China, but he's very Western in his soul and in his heart. And I think he's done a great job and continues to do a great job. That said, you know, Singapore is kind of benign authoritarian state. They don't have the level of civil liberties and ability to protest or spit gum on the sidewalk that we do in the United States. Yep. When you spend time in Singapore, you feel very safe walking the streets. So for a variety of reasons, the Singapore model wouldn't import to the United States or to the UK, United States. I just like the guy.
Well, talking about not being able to import concepts, a couple of weeks ago in my part of the world, we went to a hawker concept, Singaporean concept, serving Malaysian and Indian and Thai food. So some of those ideas are coming over. Singapore is a very impressive place.
Yeah, well, I think Singapore, for all the success they've had, and realize that Lee Kuan Yew, you know, it was a disorganized, failed state when Lee Kuan Yew took over in the early to mid 1960s, and was quite authoritarian. There was no benign to it. But he wrestled the country into shape. It just had to be done that way, apparently. And over time, I think where he didn't get a lot of credit was that he gradually loosened the reins. And now the son has gradually loosened the reins so that they have casinos and things like that in Singapore. It truly is a multicultural nation. Again, it's small, so it's a city state, where the multiculturalism is not lip service, it really works. And you have the Han Chinese, you have Malays, you have Indians, you have just, you know, because it sits at the sort of right at the corner of Southeast Asia, and then going around the corner toward India. It's wonderful. It's also wonderful if you're a lot of the Brits and Americans that are thriving in Singapore will tell you that they don't feel any barriers at all. And it's a country that, as I get older, I like the appreciation they have for wisdom and experience over there too. I think with China cracking down on Hong Kong, the main beneficiary will be Singapore. That's not an unconventional opinion. I think a lot of people are seeing it going the same way, and it was more a matter of the velocity of change. And I think the events over the last year and 6 months in Hong Kong will increase the number of Western companies who have banking companies, consulting companies, accounting companies who are going to move their Asian headquarters from Hong Kong to Singapore. I don't have a doubt in the world about that.
Let's start. We could spend hours on your Asian point of view, because it is an exciting part of the world and changing a lot. But let's come back to digital, Silicon Valley, where you live now. So it's been an amazing time during the pandemic, right? I have obviously been watching it, but tell me your perspective. Sure,
Vinnie. I think at the beginning of the year, I would have said, and this reflects my Silicon Valley bias, but it also reflects my Forbes business bias. I would have said at the beginning of 2020 that the biggest story in business was the accelerating rate of digital transformation throughout every industry, everywhere in the world. I mean, digital transformation at this point has become a little bit of a cliche, but Diane Greene, who was the founder of VMware back in the 90s and who spoke at our Forbes conference for chief information officers 3 years ago when she was still head of Google Cloud, said something extraordinary that proved to be, it was an amazing forecast that proved to be accurate. She said, the era of Moore's Law is over. Now, immediately, she wanted us moving in a certain direction so she could then flip it and make her point all the more dramatically. When somebody in 2017 said the era of Moore's Law is over, the natural thing was to think of, oh my God, this 50, 60-year run of Moore's Law is now, it's slowing down. It's slowing down because when you get down to when the standard, world-class standard for processor manufacturing is down, going from 7 nanometers to 5 nanometers to who knows what below that it becomes increasingly complex and expensive to do. I mean, TSM, Taiwan Semiconductor, is spending $20 billion to build a 5 nanometer plant. So it gets progressively more expensive and complex, and therefore the rate of progress, as predicted by Moore's Law, will inevitably slow down. And in fact, it is. I talked to Pat Gelsinger, CEO of VMware today, and who was the architect of the 486 chip when he was at Intel. And he said he would peg Moore's Law evolution at no longer at 18 months to 2 years, but at 3 years or so before you're getting a doubling of processors at the same space and cost. So Diane sort of had us leading into this, oh my God, things are slowing down. Then she said dramatically, the era of Moore's Law is over. It's now, evolution is now happening 2 to 3 times faster. And it's happening 2 to 3 times faster because of the confluence of cloud, edge, mobile, artificial intelligence, and now the last piece in the puzzle that's really rolling out this year, 5G, has created this global supercomputing superstructure that just invades everything. It changes everything. It can crunch enormous data sets. It can, 5G solves the latency problem, and things are going to accelerate. So then comes COVID. And for a moment there, for a brief moment, I thought, well, COVID will be like a yellow caution flag. When there's an accident on a racetrack, the yellow caution flag comes out while the accident is cleaned up, and during the yellow caution flags, all the cars remaining in the race slow down and nobody can pass anyone. And that's kind of what I thought initially. COVID's going to slow down everything, but in fact, it's accelerated something that was already accelerating, and that is the use of transformative technologies to transform all business operations. And so that's what's happening now. And you're seeing it. The stock market is certainly reflected. The S&P is now up for the year, but NASDAQ was up a lot sooner. I mean, it's way up. And then when you go to things like the Bessemer Ventures M Cloud Index, it's just way, way up. And probably, you can argue that these cloud-based enterprise software companies today they're certainly richly valued, probably overvalued. Smart investor I know thinks they're, looking for a 30% correction in that space. But that still gives them enormous clout in terms of market cap and in terms of the influence they're having in business today. So to me, that just is an amazing story how COVID has accelerated, not slowed down, this part of the economy.
Rich, if anything, I've been very excited in the last few months to see what I call vertical edge applications, right? So telemedicine. I interviewed the head of a big hospital chain in your part of the world. And he said, we've farted around with telemedicine for 20 years. He says, at the beginning of the year, we were 2% outpatient using telemedicine. He says, within 3 months, we're up to 50%, right? If you go to banking, PPP loans, suddenly, the SBA approached 4 million of them. There's a company called Encino, it's a Salesforce partner. They've helped a number of community banks that didn't have the capability, just overnight process thousands of loans. You go into e-commerce, Shopify has been helping all kinds of retailers with third-party logistics. They don't want to go to Amazon. They got to survive on their own, and Shopify has been helping them. So these edge applications have just been phenomenal in impact. And that's the next wave. That's the next wave of digital.
Yeah, well, I think the market has been a little indiscriminate in how it's valued some of these enterprise software companies, because there's probably a hierarchy that's emerging, the things that companies simply have to do right now versus the things that might be on a medium term, a want-to-do list, and then a longer-term want-to-do list. And I don't think the market has quite figured that out, but you're absolutely right. These edge cases are on that's the must-do now, or we go out of business kind of thing. The other thing you will hear CFOs say is what they're telling these IT vendors and enterprise software companies, we'll continue to invest because we have to invest immediately, to stay in business, is that set us up for future success. And we'll do all of that, but we're going to demand from you a much faster return on investment. I interviewed Bill McDermott of ServiceNow, the CEO of ServiceNow, and he said, the new table stakes is return on investment in weeks or short numbers of months. Yep. So I think the day of the Apollo moonshot Manhattan project, waterfall project, 2 years, and then we'll see a return on investment. They're certainly gone now, and they may be gone forever.
Finally, his old company, SAP, I heard a presentation by one of the executives who said the ERP projects are getting pushed back. But he had a slide called Amplify. He had a bunch of these small bite-sized projects. Thank God SAP has a big portfolio of them. Bill did a good job acquiring a bunch of companies, and that's selling pretty well. But small projects, remote implementations. Yeah.
Well, you and I have been around long enough to see SAP Success today truly surprises me, because it wasn't that many years ago where the rap on SAP was, you have to shape your business model to fit their software rather than the other way around. And maybe that was just an unfair cultural cliche. Germans are good at hardware. What do you expect? That's the way they would design software. But of course they become, Hasso Plattner remains a really vital force and understood the need to really have a big footprint in Palo Alto where they do. They have their HANA house, which is where they demonstrate projects in Palo Alto. And they've changed. I don't know if they would have changed as effectively if not for, Hasso Plattner really taking an interest in a leadership position, sort of a leadership coaching position, if nothing else, in the company. And then the good fortune of having Bill McDermott, who's one of the most effective CEOs in technology today, probably, along with Satya Nadella and Jeff Bezos, but of non-founder CEOs, I would put Satya Nadella number one and Bill McDermott probably number two.
Well, I'm sure he'll be happy to hear that. Rich, let's switch gears to your book. So, on the one hand, I talked to Ray Lane, who's been Kleiner, ex-Oracle. He's now got his own fund. And he commented, he says, Vinnie, the funds that raise money this year or next will be the most successful in the decade. I said, Ray, it's just the beginning of the decade. He goes, Vinnie, I'm that optimistic, right? So if you look at biotech, if you look at pandemic modeling, if you look at your idea of data science around healthcare, I mean, the opportunities are just, the cloud opportunities are just phenomenal, right? So they would seem like there's more opportunities. On the other hand, in a recession, we all know companies tend to discriminate against aging workers. They may argue otherwise, but it happens.
People who look like us, Vinnie.
And I've heard in the pandemic, a number of close to retirement folks have said, this was too much trauma. I don't need this. They rediscovered their families during lockdown and so on. But for whatever reason, I would think it's kind of an interesting time for late bloomers. Let me hear your perspectives.
When I set out to write my book, Late Bloomers, it was a departure for me because I've lived at the intersection of business, finance, and technology, and I've more interested in enterprise technology than consumer technology at this stage in my life. So writing about people who blossom late, who come into their full capacities later than is normal within the context of what they do or their industry, was always appealing to me because that's how I would have described myself. That I really didn't have a full functioning adult brain, until my late 20s, and it was sort of a serendipitous temporary typing job that turned into a technical writer job at the Electric Power Research Institute in Palo Alto back in the day. Buildings now occupied by SAP, by the way, where I started. They had a locker room, and some of the engineers and program and project managers would go out for runs, and I would go out with them. And it introduced me to this people who thought in a kind of mathematical, scientific, rational way about everything. And my dad was a high school athletic director, and I had a liberal arts degree in college, and I just was never exposed to that, as silly as it sounds, particularly when I was living in where I do in Silicon Valley. Then my progress began to be in adult life began to be pretty quick. And a few years later, a friend of mine and I started at the dawn of the desktop publishing revolution, when you could start a magazine with a Macintosh and a laser printer and some fonts from Adobe and page layout from Quark Express and stuff. It was the web of the day. A set of technologies came along that radically lowered the cost of entry into an industry and took advantage of it. So then I began to bloom. Forbes took notice of it and hired me to more or less do the same thing for them. And then I became publisher of Forbes, sort of an oddball career to becoming publisher of Forbes, but all because I bloomed late, and I bloomed into an area where I had some interest and perhaps some native gifts. I think, that Silicon Valley is guilty of ageism. Probably with the renewed emphasis on racial diversity, particularly for underrepresented people in Silicon Valley, the ageism may, take a back seat. But I think a lot of the ageism at Silicon Valley doesn't need to occur. And in fact, there are plenty of role models to show why it shouldn't occur. I will grant you that consumer technology has always been, in the province of young people because they see consumer trends. It's impossible to imagine, that you could be, roughly our age and running TikTok. You just wouldn't see the way things are unfolding. And you wouldn't be able to react to it. But when you look at the enterprise tech sector, my gosh, the previously mentioned Bill McDermott is 59 or 60. Tom Siebel, you interviewed Ed Abbo, is number 2 a few weeks ago. Great interview, by the way. But, Tom is going to be 68 in September, and he's leading, C3.ai after, enormously successful career. You think about Dave Duffield at Workday, starting Workday in his 60s and still being involved in the company. I mentioned Hasso Plattner, one of the founders of SAP, leading a renaissance of the company quite late in his life. And I think that enterprise tech really lends itself to that more, to the person who maybe they're not the coder they once were, but they see the big picture in a way. They have industry knowledge, they have wisdom, they've seen this play or that play before, they've been to that rodeo. And, in the long sales cycle of an enterprise software sale, all of those things really help. And so, you see leadership there. Secondly, I think this low code, no code environment that is changing enterprise software, much as much as decades before, Apple learned how to hide the complexity of everything it did and made everything beautifully vertically integrated and beautiful to look at and to operate. And as enterprise software goes that way, it's going to open up opportunities for people who aren't cutting edge coders, which again is sort of a door that favors the young, versus the old. There's fascinating brain research around when we bloom and why and where we bloom. And there are certain professions where you do see people blooming early. Rapid fire coding under a time pressure favors the young. It's just the way young brains are built. It's like young Major League Baseball pitchers throw with a greater velocity than they will, 10 years later. But if they evolve as a pitcher, they learn more pitches, they learn to be crafty, they learn to be canny, they can read the batter's body language, they become more disciplined about studying film, and they can have very effective careers, even though they aren't the speed demons that they once were. And I think as we get into our 30s, 40s, and 50s, we have greater capacity to lead, to inspire, to communicate, to multi-process. And then as we get into our 60s and 70s, we have this great ability to tie things together and to teach. That which has been called wisdom throughout the millennia. There's a neuroscientist at NYU named Elkanan Goldberg, who in his own case, in his late 60s, he was coming up with intuitions that would be proven out when he did the actual disciplined math and science around intuition. It would turn out his intuition would be more often correct than not. His batting average for intuitions proving to be accurate got higher and higher. And his theory, and it's a controversial theory, but his theory is that the networks that connect the two sides of our brain, the logical side, which is also the memory storage side, along with the side that likes stimulus and novelty and creativity, there's more and more communications. It's almost like the brain is saying, how do you look at this? How do you see the world? Well, I can understand why you're exciting, but look, when I stack it up against previous things, that looked kind of similar, it didn't really pan out. And so, so that gets better as we get older, provided we stay in good health. We haven't had a stroke, we stay physically fit and mentally alert. We don't become couch potatoes. So I think it's all very encouraging. I would say, practically speaking, and I've gone on here, but this is an important point. I think too many industries and companies have what we'd call an up and out career path. You get raises and you get more responsibility. You have people reporting to you, and up and up and up you go until, let's say you're in your middle 50s and somebody in the finance department of your company says, my God, we pay that person a lot of money, A. And two, there's this person 10 years younger than this that we need to either make room for in upper management levels, or we're going to lose that person. So now the person in their middle 50s gets fired. They get a buyout package if the company's healthy, but they get, they're let go. And I think if we could replace that with sort of a career arc, if we could come to a common agreement, if we could have a rational discussion where adults are talking to their, good people, good contributors, with an adult-minded mentality, are talking with HR and legal and negotiating a backside of the arc career package. It might look like this. You give up your title. You're no longer executive vice president. You're going to give up a big chunk of your compensation package. But you also will get to give up working 60 and 70 hours a week. Let's negotiate something. How much do you want to work? Oh, 30 is good enough for me. And I want to have some outside projects. Okay, let's negotiate a package that will reflect that. And then here are your new duties. They're going to evolve over time, so you become an internal consultant and a coach. And I think once you remove the title, then you remove and people know where they are on the career arc, then you remove the kind of defensiveness you see sometimes upper level executives where they undermine, the careers of people who might take their jobs. Because it's now understood you're on the other side of the arc. I would love to see, I'm told that HR departments and legal departments just say it's a legal landmine if you go there, but some visionary companies and some leaders like Mark Benioff, who have a lot of moral clout in the Valley, I'd love to see him take a look at that.
I guess some companies have moved to the concept of a shamrock organization, which some of the resources you're talking about end up as one of the leaves, not necessarily on the payroll, as consultants. Rich, you're always so positive. I mean, we've talked about software, we've talked about late bloomers, we've talked about governors. You're always so positive. So let me ask you this, because it's something I don't understand. I find the media has become very negative. It's all about outreach. I guess they get their eyeballs that way. Is it likely to change after the elections? I mean, it just seems like we should be talking about all the innovation that's happening in this time frame, and hardly any of them want to talk about that. It's all doom and gloom, and it's all about politics. Are we going to see us change?
I don't know. I would like to think so. There would be a correction, but I don't know. Recently, this is within the last month, the news director for MSNBC, we're not a news organization anymore. She said, we provide comfort for our team. And the same is true of Fox News. We provide, I think the news organization of Fox has some fine people. I think Chris Wallace, Brett Baer, and others. But the nighttime hosts are providing comfort for their team. It's like shirts against skins. Nobody wants to give an inch. I think, though, there is a way to go through life and get information and avoid all of that. I start my day with realclearpolitics.com, which is a great human aggregated site where humans, intelligent humans, are aggregating sort of paired news stories or commentary on issues that are really important today or are important this week or this season. So you might see an article on economics where Paul, one is a link to a Paul Krugman column, the left of center columnist and Nobel Prize winner in economics who writes the column for the New York Times. And the other one would be more of a libertarian free market point of view from somebody of equal weight. And it's sort of good to see these paired and to read wherever you're coming from, to make sure that you read the other side, to know that these aren't evil people who take a view that is different than yours. They just have they've reached a different conclusion to facts that maybe you're both seeing. And maybe they're seeing facts you should be seeing, and maybe they should be seeing some facts that you're seeing. But you can go through issues like that. Another source of optimism to me is just pure business and market news, whether it's Forbes or TechCrunch, I find TechCrunch and, the information and sources like that to be largely optimistic, because they're covering fields that are, where so much innovation is happening. I think in the finance area, I love reading Seeking Alpha, and I recommend, it's worth it to spend $150 or whatever it is to get the premium package so that you can read earnings reports and things like that. My God, I feel just reading the earnings report, so many people don't know that earnings reports are more or less publicly available. And if, here you have, a CEO of a company up against some analysts who want to know what's going on. And this is really valuable information to have. I used to find sports and sports news a source of inspiration. And boy, I don't know whether it's because I'm getting older or what it is, probably COVID. I just don't find much inspiration there at all, except sort of old stories and old things you can watch on YouTube. I recently wrote a column in Forbes on Sandy Koufax, the great Brooklyn and LA Dodgers pitcher, and how he was a late bloomer, and which confounds people because Sandy Koufax retired at 30. How could somebody who retired at 30 and, was a Hall of Fame first ballot choice and is considered the greatest left-hand pitcher in Major League history, how could he be a late bloomer? Well, he had two distinct careers. His first 6 years as a Dodger, mostly in Brooklyn, but a couple years in LA, were really mediocre. And then he got one piece of advice that proved to be valuable, and that is, don't throw so damn hard. Sandy, you're rearing back so far you can't even see home plate. Your problem is you're wild and batters can wait you out. Throw 95% of, just do everything at 95% speed, and with your arm, that'll be enough. And he learned it, and it just magically transformed his career. I often think, as we all of us stumble through life, what if there was that person who said, if you change this one thing in the way you see things, things could be so much better for you. So to me, those are seeds of optimism, that get me excited.
Fascinating. Thank you so much. And stay healthy and stay safe from all those fires.
Yeah. Well, thanks. Thanks. It does put you in a grumpy mood, these fires in particular, because it's just one more rock in your backpack in a year where there's been a lot of rocks in your backpack. But we are blessed to be alive. We are blessed to have an interest in technology, digital transformation, enterprise software. It's just a tremendously exciting field.
Well, when we can fly again, I'm going to come visit you and we'll go have a meal.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Vinnie. I can hardly